It's Tony Høydersen, and we are excited to see a lot of people here. We are starting this first off with a seminar, and then we'll move on to book pitch that starts at 3 o'clock. And after all, you're all invited to a boat trip, and the weather is beautiful for that. So the boat will leave outside of Maritime, the little cinema, just outside the hotel. You will see the boat where you can invite it. But first of all, we are start the seminar, and we are very pleased to welcome Linda Beath from Java, who's going to enlighten us on how to adapt books on screen. And I know there's a lot of book people present, and there's a lot of producers present. I hope you have a fruitful stay here in Haugesund. Welcome, Linda.
Thank you. I wish I was as good as she said. I've tried adapting books to screen, and I haven't yet succeeded, so I think I'm going to give you the what not to do rather than the what to do. First of all, my background, I started off in the industry in a very wonderful National Film Board of Canada at a point in time when they were doing innovative animation, feature-length documentaries, had a studio for women to make films, had a different studio for First Nations, the Indigenous people of Canada, to make films, and kept winning Oscars. So it was a high-level entry into the industry, despite my lowly position. I then specialized in art films, meaning anything with subtitles, in Canada and the United States, and distributed some of Europe's best films in North America. I was so successful with 3 Canadian films. They actually made their money back by one sale in the US market that Telefilm Canada thought, oh, she knows how to do it, let's get her. I went to work at the worst job I've ever had. I got to spend $80 million a year on bad films. Not for me. But I did learn about the distinct relationship between time, money, and film. And I think that stood me in great stead, because ever since then I've only done financing. So I help producers finance films. I don't develop films, I don't cast films, I have nothing to do with production logistics. You'll never see me on set, and I concentrate on marketing. So the idea of distribution and the idea of financing are my kind of 2 driving factors. I also studied business planning when I started a distribution company, because I was going through this roller coaster ride of high highs and low lows and couldn't quite figure out how to balance money over time. So that stood me in good stead, and I spend probably 50 or 60 days a month working with production companies, helping them run their businesses rather than develop a project. And I sometimes do policy for film finance, and particularly at the moment new business models, because the industry is changing so much. So I come from a distinct place of worrying about time and money and good film. Today's agenda is I'm going to give you a timeline for a feature film so that the publishers and the audience understand just how much time it takes to get a film from an idea or the first read of a novel right through until the end of producers spending their time helping market films. And then I'll talk about my theory of the 5 zones of Europe, 5 areas of Europe which perform similarly, and each one distinctly different than the others. I'd like to profile feature film, particularly expenses and revenues over time. And then I'm going to go through development and pre-production as one stage of making a film, production as the next stage, the green light, meaning yes, you can make your movie, production and post-production, again a timeline, and then I'll move on to what happens after a film is made. So I use PowerPoint to keep me on track. And I'm very conscious that A, I speak English as my mother tongue, and B, I use financial and film industry terminology, often quite precisely. interrupt me if you don't understand a word or a concept, and I won't lose track of where I'm going, and I would much rather everybody's kind of following what I'm saying rather than distracted by a word that you've never heard before or don't quite understand the meaning of. Of the AAVE participants in the audience will tell you my sessions tend to be quite interactive. So, the timeline for a feature film is actually about 7 years. Development takes 2.5 to 4 years. The 2.5 years is usually a writer who has a lot of experience working with a director he or she knows and has worked with in the past, and usually the two of them working with a producer for the second, third, or fourth time. Production is the shortest period of making a film. It's between 2 and 4 months, and in the States right now, independent films are only taking 3 weeks to produce. Post-production is a longer period, 4 to 6 months, and it takes 2 to 3 years for revenue to come in. Between post-production and revenues, there's often a wait time that can be up to a year long. If you need to launch your film at a festival, you may have to wait 8 months to do it. So, in the framework of that period of time, I'd like to outline how time and money works, how development, production, post-production, and revenues work in the 5 zones of Europe. So, local film industries are similar in 5 regions, and I'll go through every single one of those regions. The first similarity or difference is the availability of development funds. If you're in the UK and Ireland right now, you can get somewhere above 100,000 to develop your film, 100,000 euro. If you're in Italy, if you get 5,000, you're lucky, and 50,000 is reserved only for the most experienced combination of writer, director, producer, and only paid for about 3 a year by RAI. So development funding is all over the map in Europe. There's not a lot of it, and there is, per project, very little going from south to north and going from east to west. Development budgets change, including what you can regard as the development cost. And I'll go into some detail on those because that profoundly affects your ability to buy the rights or option the rights to books. Story editors are used extensively in Anglo-Saxon countries. They're used fairly often in France, Germany, and Scandinavia. There are no script editors in most of the CEE countries, Central and Eastern European countries. Although North America has agencies that represent every level of filmmaking, there are agents who represent talent. And again, it's a north to south thing. There are a lot of agents in the northern countries, including Scandinavia and Western Europe. There are very few talent agents, and in most cases there's only a lawyer or a manager for even the biggest stars in Italy and Spain. And it's the same way from west to east. The amounts of national sources of financing range from very small to very big. The biggest funds are in France and Germany. Moderate amounts of financing are available in Scandinavia and the other Western European countries. And there are very little amounts of money available for financing films in the CE. The average cost of a feature film varies widely. It's as low as 350,000 in Estonia and as high as 4.8 million in France. The number of features produced per company changes. Local distributors, sales agents, and video-on-demand platforms vary, and the release potential in local cinemas varies widely. So here are the 5 zones. The Nordic countries, in 2016, which is the last year for which we have any good statistics. Incidentally, all of these statistics are from the European Audiovisual Observatory, which is one of my kind of favorite organizations in Europe. It can teach you a lot about this industry. They have wonderful databases, and they publish 2 books in the Cannes Film Festival every year, which you can pick up for free, Focus and World Funds. And a lot of this material comes from Focus or directly from the observatory itself. So in the Nordic countries, the average feature film budgets are 1.1 to 2.3 million. The 2.3 million is Sweden, and it is higher than it used to be. There was over a decade where it was less than that, and it was a decision on the part of the Swedish Film Institute and the Swedish Producers Association. They wanted fewer films with higher budgets. Otherwise, they would have been lower than this, about 1.8 at the point they made the decision to change. Last year, they made 209 features and feature documentaries. That includes majority co-productions. Compare it to the CEE countries, Estonia all the way down to Albania. The average feature film budgets were 350,000 to $1.1 million. So co-producing with Eastern Europe tends to be advantageous for the Scandinavians, because if they shoot in one of these countries, they generally save quite a lot on their production costs. They made 318 plus features. Albania never reports on time, so this is without Albania. But they made 318 last year. This was a substantial increase. They were much closer to the 209 Nordic output until recently. Southern Europe, the region I come from, the average budgets are 600,000 to 2.58. The 2.58 is Spain, and that's somewhat overstated because every year they make a film with Antonio Banderas or Del Toro or one of their larger actors, and that's included in their total. Their average budget's probably closer to 2.2. The Italian average budget's now 1.5. So as you can tell, even shooting in Italy is going to be cheaper than what you can do here. However, they made an astounding 459 films last year. So they're a production powerhouse, and of course most of that is in fact coming from Italy and Spain. Malta has produced 1 feature film, and I think is about to produce a second co-production with Canada. Greece produces a number of films, but they tend to be of the 600,000, if not lower, variety. Portugal fairly consistently produces a handful of films a year. Industrial Europe, France, Belgium, Luxembourg, Germany, this is the production powerhouse of Europe. They produced 693 films, and their budgets are 1.8 to 4.8, the 4.8 being France. Germany is surprising because they are the low end. The Netherlands and Germany's average budgets are the 1.8, and that's despite the amount of money available in Germany. And then Anglo-Saxon Europe, I've included larger budget Luc Besson films in English in this. Their average budgets are the highest in Europe, 3.9 to 9.1. That 9.1 includes the latest Harry Potter, so, you know, it's probably closer to 5 million. And they produced 166 films, very few of which were co-productions. This is the hardest of the 5 zones to co-produce with. So as a kind of overview, when you're trying to sell a book to a producer, your fees are going to differ in exactly the same proportion as the average budgets differ over these 5 zones. So, timeline for a feature film, as I've said, it takes 7 years. But the costs are spread in a very consistent manner. Development is between 15 and 20% of the total budget. That includes going from the idea right through to the green light, which means that includes some money that's going to be spent, for example, building period sets or making the most complex costumes, or getting your key department heads and your director on hold fees. So although some production costs are included there, during production in that very short period, you're going to spend 60% of the total budget. And most of the funders are very good about giving us enough money to be able to pay as we go on installments. But quite often producers have to go to banks and cash flow. And then post-production is 20 to 25% of the total. Any questions so far? You're quiet. It's like Belgium. Whenever you go to Belgium, nobody asks any questions, and it kind of throws me. Okay. Development. I noticed this man's last name. I've read his pieces forever, but it kind of hit today. So, the books you want to choose to adapt to a film or a TV series have to have certain characteristics. And what Michael Haugesund says is that in order to do a good or great adaptation, you have to have emotionally involving characters. They have to overcome seemingly insurmountable obstacles, and they have to achieve their compelling desires. So if you're looking at a novel and trying to successfully adapt it to screen, his advice is to look for the characters, the obstacles, and the desires, and satisfy them. I think that's a slightly Hollywood take on adaptation. So every production company has a slate of films that are in development. In Europe, there's an average that they've been studying through the media program since 1990. And they do it about every 5 years, and it comes out to the same number every time they do it. For every 4 films put into development, 1 film is produced. So 3 films are on a shelf, forgotten about, abandoned, put into turnaround, but there's nothing happening to those 3 films. The average development time is 2.5 to 4 years. So in order to produce 1 film each year, which is the real goal of a good production company or a good producer, 6 have to be in active development. Active development means a writer's writing, a director is dealing with his input, including visuals, producer is talking, story editor is working. It doesn't sit around for a month with nothing happening. Each producer can only develop 6 to 7 projects simultaneously. It's not possible to juggle more than that. Your brain can't cope with it. So the magic of a production company is that the more producers who are developing, the stronger the company will be. There's no other moral to the story. There's a woman who is a writer, a professor at NYU, and a novelist, and she had probably the best advice I'd ever read about the best books to film projects. And it's a series of 10 questions. I've given you a link to her articles in the last pages, so you can relax and just think about the questions. Does the book bring an audience with it? Well, Lord of the Rings definitely brought an audience with it. So did Harry Potter. A book doesn't have to bring an audience with it. I don't know how many people actually read Handmaid's Tale, but I started it at least 5 times. And I consider myself an acquaintance of Margaret Atwood, and I never made it through. and it's now a massive hit in North America as a series. Okay. Does the book have a brand? It's a lot easier to sell a film if there is something that can have unique UPSs and is able to brand, so that finding the audience, marketing the film, and knowing how to sell it is a real positive if the book has that with it. Is the book one of, or is it part of a series? If it's part of a series, you, the publishers, have real questions to ask. Making a single movie out of a series of books isn't satisfying. Making a series out of a series of books is probably where you want to aim. It doesn't mean you won't make a pilot first, a one-off, but it does mean that the longer term has to be taken into consideration. From a producer's point of view, you can't option one book out of a series. You have to option a series of books. Is it possible to get the legal rights over time? Well, now that you know that it can take 4 years to get a film to the green light stage, is it possible to get 4 years? A 2-year option with a 2-year renewal, or a 3-year option with an automatic 1-year renewal, but 4 years is what producers have to look at. Are additional rights required? Are there real characters in the book that also have to agree to allow their stories to be used? So that there are issues that you have to ask about what's in the content as well as what's on the page. Does the book have basic elements? And for her, the basic elements are an unusual setting, or an unusual period of history, or an unusual period in certain aspects that make it unique to film. Are there memorable characters? Are there unusual problems? And is there a surprising plot? Does the book have the right structure? Not all novel plots have a structure that can translate to a screen. Does the book have a clear story? Is the book the right size? By size, we're talking about something between the number of pages and the number of scenes per page. So it cannot be adapted. And does the book have a good frame? And that's the frame for the story. So the point I wanted to make here is that producers have basic issues that they have to look at in order to be able to adapt a novel. And once they've gotten to that point, they're then going to start on a process that involves hiring a writer, getting a lawyer, and working with a director. The costs involved, the 15 to 20%, include many issues. The underlying rights, which is the purview of the publishers, the cost of the writer of the screenplay, and maybe the cost of a second writer who is good at dialogue, a story editor, paying for the director to contribute to the script. There may be a head of development, and in many cases, specialist consultants are brought on board to deal with either history or medical issues or scientific issues to make sure that what's in the script actually adheres to the reality. There are budget, schedule, and production logistics that have to be paid for, usually by a line producer. Casting agents and hold fees. Actors often allow us to finance films. We have an increasing need to make trailers, teasers, and video tests, not just for TV, but also for the web. Communications, translations, and travel. This is an issue with co-productions. For example, if you're lucky enough to get ZDF to decide that they want to co-produce this film with Norway, you're going to find that everything has to be in German or the funders won't look at it. So it's not that you can send in an English language script, it's that the script is in German. Insurance, legal and accounting, and production company fees and overheads, which are allowable in the Nordic countries but not allowable in Southern Europe. So these costs have totals, and they vary over those 5 zones of Europe that I gave you. In the Nordic countries, your costs range from 75,000 to 125,000. I have to admit these are informal numbers, and you can correct me, but I got these usually from the film institutes. In this case, I think it was Nordic Film and TV Fund that helped me with these numbers. In Eastern Europe, the numbers are much smaller. There's so little money available that they keep costs down. So it's 20,000 to 75,000. In Southern Europe, it's 50,000 to 125,000. Clearly that 125 is Spain. Certainly not Italy. Industrial Europe's 100 to 175,000. The 175,000 really is uniquely a French phenomena. And then Anglo-Saxon Europe, the costs start skyrocketing. In Ireland, it's about 125,000, but in the UK, it's 200,000 plus. It's not unlikely to see costs like 350 to 450,000. Yes, of course. It's more like the development budget they send, or the schedule of development expenses they send when they apply for production. So, because there are certain costs that the funders will not pay for, but accept are legitimate expenses. Yeah, I mean, for example, this is the one that drives me crazy. No funder in Europe thinks that booking a domain name, let alone 20 of them, is a legitimate development cost. And all of us have to have our domain names locked the minute we have a title or we've lost it. Yes? I've worked WGA and WGC, and I have to say of the two, the WGC is closer to what's going on in Europe. Yeah, and the Writers' Union in England and the Writers' Union in Ireland and the Writers' Union in France, I think, are the only writers' unions with any strength in Europe at all. No, in the Nordic, well, for example, in Southern Europe, writers would be paid 30 to 40,000 for a full screenplay, not an adaptation. In the Nordic countries, I think it's 35. Is it?
That's kind of minimum.
Minimum to 50, 35 to 50.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. Anything else? The sources of development funding in Europe are the national funders. We all know them all. There are some regional funders, but they're rare, and most of the regional funds don't want anything to do with it. They don't want to take the risk. So there's very little money available, even when the writer, director, and producer are in the region. The pan-national funders, particularly the media program, are contributing. Media is great for more established production companies because of slate funding, which allows about 200,000 every 2 years if you time things correctly, and it's non-refundable. TV broadcasters, many of them have separate development divisions that feed their pipeline of both films and TV programs. There are an increasing number of prizes and awards specific to this stage on the one hand. On the other hand, producers are under duress to attend too many pitch forums and too many pitch sessions in order to win these awards. Producers and co-producers always invest in development. There isn't any producer that makes money. They are continually making sure they have enough in development to produce what they need. There are some pre-sales of rights for exploitation that can be made at a development stage, and part of that money, usually 10%, can be applied to development. And then private investors who are repaid on first day of principal photography, but usually at a premium. So they may get 125% of what they gave. This is the most expensive money. Development costs. In order to make a film, you have to have a sales draft of the script. And for anybody who doesn't know what a sales draft is, it is the draft of the script that the director has signed off on, that the producer has taken the 5 most emotional scenes and overwritten them. It's the only time you see adjectives in a script. And it is aimed squarely at proving to the funders, the distributors, the broadcasters, and the sales agents that the film is saleable, that it can be marketed, and that it will have an audience. The director has to be signed, the lead actor is identified, if not signed. Budget schedule, production logistics, a mood board, distribution and or sales agent LOI. In Germany, also a broadcaster LOI, letter of interest, a sizzle reel, and a financing plan so that it looks fully financed. And that financing plan has to be realistic. So this will take 3 to 6 months after you've gotten somewhere between the 3rd and 8th draft of the script. In the Nordic countries, it's draft 6, 7, or 8 normally that gets sold. In Italy, it's 3rd. There's no more money. There's an argument in England that before 16th draft, it's not worth making. So it's another difference in the 5 zones. Okay, so once you're at a point where you have everything you need, the key sources of production financing are, first of all, it's going to take you 6 to 9 months to finance, and often it takes a year. So national and regional funds, broadcasters, and tax incentives are the biggest amounts of money that are supporting European film right now. The national and regional funds are particularly generous and come in between 25 and 50% of the money. The broadcasters are putting less and less in, and it's getting discouraging. ZDF used to put in 700,000, then it dropped, then it dropped, then it dropped, then it got to 180,000, and 2 years ago they dropped to 90,000 on certain acquisitions. So broadcaster funding is decreasing. On the other hand, everybody's got a tax incentive. So I think we're almost completely tax incentived out across Europe. Tax incentives range from as low as 17% in Israel, and it's not even 17%, to 20% for a lot of European countries like Hungary, to 32% in the UK and Ireland. Distributors and sales agents put up bits of money. If you're making it in the English language, you can get major amounts. The King's Speech, based on a not great script, not a great sales script, but with a good director and 2 lead actors, got £1,250,000 advance. So that advance came as cash flow during production. the kinds of numbers that you see now are 20,000, 25,000, tops 75,000 from maybe Match Factory when they're in competition with Beta over a film they really want. Co-producers, private investors. Private investment, interestingly, in the Nordic countries is improving. There's more money being put in. Smaller amounts, 50 to 100,000, but it is being put in. Goods, services, and facilities. There are some prizes and awards, and then there are ancillary rights, and by that I mean things like product placement, sponsorship, merchandising, that kind of thing. The next stage is green light. All the financing is identified. The key funder deal memos are signed. All the legal contracts are drafted, if not signed. The director, lead and key actors, heads of department and specialists are signed. Heads of department means the key crew, like the director of photography or the editor. Below the line staff are being hired by those department heads. The production office is established, somewhat organized, but probably not. And the locations are identified and permits are being organized. So there's a location manager on board. And the post-production facilities are usually booked in advance. So from the green light, it's called prep. Preparation begins, and that lasts probably 12 weeks. For period films, much longer. Now, what I've just given you is true of fiction feature films. If I had to go back and do animation, the life cycle is actually 5 years, with another 3 for release, so it's an 8-year cycle. But the majority of the first 4 years is a combination of writing, establishing the voice track, usually in English, and doing initial animation, all the characters and backgrounds, and producing 2.5 minutes, which is what's needed in order to finance. So if you're dealing with animation, it's a slower cycle. If you're dealing with documentaries, it's a faster, more mixed up cycle where you shoot, edit what you've shot, even if it's only 2 minutes. You show it to a broadcaster who says, shoot more. You go and shoot more. You come back with 7 minutes. You come back with 12 minutes. You come back with 20 minutes, and then you finally get the money. By then, you've probably spent between 25 and 35% of the total budget of the feature-length documentary. Yeah. It's not true at all in Europe. If soft money includes tax incentive, probably 75. Yeah. I know Cassian. We don't agree on very much. His attitude is so North American, it's hard to speak to him because he doesn't understand either the timing or the multiple. It's quite normal in Scandinavia to have 17 to 20 financiers financing a single film. They know how to work together. They have matching contracts. It's a long-established industry, and I think Cassian would fall apart at number 3. Okay. Sorry, I've gone from we've got a green light, we're working through all of the mechanics of getting the film made, and we're moving on to the first day of principal photography. The first day of principal photography is the day we all love. The producer spends his entire time behind a desk raking in checks and signing checks, because that's the day when all of the financing is contracted and due, And when 50% of it approximately is released to the producer, who has, you know, a myriad of debts that he has to clear and payments that have to be made weekly throughout production. The underlying rights holders are paid the majority of their money on this date. The scriptwriter is paid his full fee, and the development costs are repaid if they're repayable. So, for example, Rai TV has a development pot that is completely different from a financing production pot. So they actually take and fund the production, and the producer takes some of that money and repays the development pot, because that development pot is reserved for the next film. Okay, so there's this cycle that goes on. This isn't true in other countries or with other broadcasters necessarily, but that was certainly the way it was done originally. And to a certain extent, you find pockets of funders who have the expectation of being repaid. So, production then begins and lasts approximately 8 weeks. And we talk about wrap being the last day of principal production. Sets close down, the crews go home, and we're down to an editor, an editor's assistant, sound people, a director, and a producer. It goes from 100 people to about 5 in one night of a wrap party. The delivery date is the day the film and supporting materials, including all legals, have to be given to the distributors and sales agents, broadcasters if they're involved. And the final cost report is the final accounting that goes to all of the financiers. It also initiates the last payments from everybody except Eurimage. Eurimage waits until theatrical release for a final payment. But basically, if you wrap 4 to 6 months later, there's a delivery date and you're issuing final cost reports. So, any questions about anything leading up to we have a film? No? Okie doke. So the initial releases, sales to other countries usually begin with a festival launch. That's really the cycle in Europe. Sales agents, if they haven't already bought a film, want to buy your film before anybody sees it, including any festival organizer. The international sales agents really need to control the festival rollout, because they're going to be targeting different festivals for different reasons, and they have undue influence on festivals. They tend to be able to place your film with a festival in a way that you, the producer, are not able to. So the advice that all of us kind of adhere to is that we want the sales agent first. How do we get them and when do we get them is the issue. Local distribution is usually not festival dependent, but rather a function of maximizing theatrical potential. For example, if you have a film festival in Locarno in August, Italy knows what's showing in Locarno, but if you wanted to release it in Rome, there's nobody home. So the way that would work is, do you go from Locarno to the Rome Film Festival and then release the film to Roman audiences, or do you ignore the Rome Film Festival and have a big, glitzy, and usually expensive rollout of advertising at the end of September when people are starting to go back to the cinema? So local distribution is less predictable than the timing of, say, a sales campaign. Features only remain on the cinema circuit for 3 months. The next step in the timing and money of a film are called release windows, and this is how a film plays. For the first 3 months, it plays exclusively in cinemas. There's nowhere else it can play, and the cinema owners in Europe are highly protective of this window. They fight to keep it. They don't want any video on demand while it's on. They refuse to let it show on TV. They want the only place you can see it to be their big screen. The next 6 months is divided actually into two sets of 3 months. 3 months of rentals of DVDs, pay-per-view, and video on demand, and then sales through DVDs, pay-per-view, or video on demand. DVDs are declining. They're still selling and renting, but they're declining as a percentage of the market. And they figure by 2021 DVDs will be almost immaterial. Pay TV is a 6 to 12 month window, and it's usually for 21 screenings. And at the same time, you'll find that there are mobile and digital downloads available. So this is really where the market opens up. Free TV, which is still the biggest single chunk of money, is 12 months to 72 months. And they usually incorporate a second station so that you find most of your broadcaster contracts are now first window, the big public broadcaster, and second window, either a digital broadcaster or a specialty channel of some kind. And then the big channel might get it back again. And then finally, specialty TV. Now, what's happening with video on demand is that it's just taking the bottom out of the entire industry. And there's a new world out there. Netflix isn't the only reason for it, but one of the reasons for it. But the cinemas are down to 2 months in a lot of countries, not here yet, with digital and coming in earlier, so that you're finding that day and date video on demand is happening on an experimental basis, or it's happening in the United States for real. The example that I usually give is a division of the Weinstein brothers has specialized in target audiences, and they are doing things like playing 30 cinemas and then putting day and date on and marketing to a niche audience. The latest film that I saw statistics for had about 4 to 1 earnings. 4 times the amount of money was earned digitally on video on demand as was earned in the cinemas. And it was with a film that was targeted at young black women. And they've become extremely good at this. So the digital market for niche audiences is actually becoming bigger and bigger than it would be any other way. There is IPTV and iPlayers who are interfering with the cinema releases. In the home video market, which DVD is called now, actually most of the money is being earned first of all by transactional video on demand. That's classic iTunes. You buy the film for 24 or 48 hours, you look at it, and you can't look at it again. Or for particularly children's films, EST, electronic sell-through. So you buy the film to view it as many times as you want. The price is inflated. The pay TV, supposedly Netflix, although it's not, model is usually 9 to 12 months, although Netflix is now buying 3 years. And there are mobile and internet downloads. There is transactional and subscription video on demand and electronic sell-through. So within about 8 months of the film being released, it's all over the web. Either you put it there and are earning money from it, or somebody else has put it there and you're not earning anything. So you have no choice. It has to get onto the internet as quickly as you can get it there. Free TV is still this window of 12 to 72 months, but I'm expecting that the broadcasters are going to have to change because they're under such pressure from all of the subscription video on demand platforms. And specialty TV, the equivalent there is advertiser supported and free video on demand. So the only country that's actually controlling windows is France. And they have a very nice legislated system that I have to say most countries in Europe are looking at, so don't be surprised if you start seeing this adapted across Europe. There's no question for the first 3 months the cinemas have an exclusive window, and if they find it on anything anywhere, then the Conseil Supérieur Audiovisuel has a system of being able to remove it. Then there is transactional video on demand, iTunes, Univers NA, or DVD sales, followed by, as you can see, transactional video on demand starts at month 4 and goes on forever. Electronic sell-through starts when paid TV starts, but there are no video on demand rentals. And then free TV, then SVOD. So it's only 3 years later that Netflix is going to be able to show a French film. And needless to say, Netflix is not happy about this. Okay, so the reason I've shown you all of that is that this is where the money comes back. This is where writers and novelists and rights holders are going to start earning money. The distributor owns theatrical rights and gives money to the sales agent. He also owns home video rights and TV rights. So the sales agent collects all of these rights. Minimum guarantees are sometimes paid, but not always for non-English language films. And they report every 3 months for the first couple of years about the money coming in. And it works as a kind of graph. It builds up, and at year 2, after the first theatrical showing, you hit peak revenues. So that if you are going to participate in the revenues of a film, you're going to wait 2 years from first theatrical release. And then it kind of slides down, and then it gets a little bit bumpy because there are all sorts of things that can happen. A TV sale here, or a sudden interest, or a revival. The video on demand rights are retained by the sales agent, but increasingly sales agents are willing to give the video on demand rights back to the producer early. The kind of thing that happens is that the distributors take the video on demand rights for their territory, and then a good film in Europe sells 30 other countries. There are another 170 or 180 other countries where it should be on the internet, and it's not, because the sales agents are not taking responsibility for that internet distribution. So a lot of producers have taken those rights back and are working with aggregators to try and get their films beyond the 30 countries that have rights to the film. And then the other source of revenue are remake rights. So with distribution rights, they get a country or a territory in all media without restrictions. I put languages in here because some countries, like Italy, ask for the world in Italian. And that means that Italy has the right to sell Latina television in Canada, which broadcasts in Spanish and Italian. So their market extends, but they can't sell it with English subtitles. It's Italian only. The term is usually 7, 15, or 25 years, and the deal, there are two main deals. 50-50 costs off the top. If it costs them $200,000 to release the film in the Nordic countries, the first $200,000 goes back to them to repay their costs, and then anything else is split 50-50. The other one is a different way to split the money. They recover their costs, and they recover 25 to 35%, and then they give the balance to the producer. Now, one deal is better if there's a little bit of money, but the other deal is better if there's a lot of money. So there's a lot of mathematical estimation and guess making going on when you're negotiating deals. There are usually minimum and maximum costs. For example, with a sales agent, you'd say it's going to cost you $70,000 unless you go to Cannes. Then we'll add another $30,000 because Cannes is expensive. And sometimes there are advances and minimum guarantees. I think in the Nordic countries you're lucky because you have pan-Nordic distributors who are still used to putting up MGs. So the timeline for that money coming in is for the first 6 months after theatrical release, the producer never sees anything. For the next year and a half, months 6 to 18, you'll find that most of the costs are recovered, and most of that is from income from cinemas. Then months 18 to 30, home video kicks in, and the first TV, pay TV revenues come in. And that's a kind of peak earning period. This is where you're going to start seeing the most money. And then from months 36 to 48, I know there's a 6-month period missing there. And I think it was probably 36, yeah. I'd probably say it's 18 to 36 months home video and first TV revenues, and that's the peak earning period. And then 36 to 48 months, declining earnings except for possible SVOD sales. So for anybody who has a percentage of the producer's revenues, you're really looking at 18 to 36 months after release. Sales agents are fairly similar. They act as an agent who grants a license to a local distributor, usually for an exclusive territory and usually in all media. Their terms are 5, 7, 15, 25 years, unless it's the United States who wants in perpetuity. The deals change. The higher the sale, the less they take. So, for example, if you're selling a primetime American network, you only give them 5 to 15%. If you're selling the opposite, which is, a very small country that pays something low like €500, it's probably 35%. There are maximum and minimums negotiated for what they can spend and recover. And there's sometimes a minimum guarantee or an advance. I think most of the Nordic countries are in the range of 25 to 50,000, and I don't think much more than that. And then the countries sold, for most EU films, it's between 7 and 10 countries. So the majority of films that are made in the EU only ever get out to those 7 or 10. Prize winners around 20. There was a wonderful interview with 4 months, 3 weeks, 2 days, which, as you know, won the Palme d'Or. It sold 21 countries, and as the filmmaker said, and lost money in all of them. Commercial hits can sell up to 75, and family audience pleasers, Nico and the Stars, Oops Noah, 2x2, and Thor all sold 120 or 130 countries, but that's the maximum. And then international sales. The producer gets nothing for the first 6 months after the first festival, but months 6 to 18, they're starting to see costs being recovered, producers' revenues amounts are increasing, and direct TV sales are really driving the bigger amounts of money. From months 18, I'd say again to 36, it's really peak earnings. The distributors are reporting regularly to the sales agents. The sales agents make sure it's happening. They're reporting regularly to the producers. And this is where all of the effort has gone on to, first of all, theatrical distribution, and then on to TV sales, and increasingly making sure that there's SVOD sales supporting them. The recoupable cost of production is a calculation that you need to know how to make, particularly if you're representing a novelist. Not all sources of funding need to be repaid. So the recoupable cost of a production is different than the budget of a film. So recoupable costs are things like international funds, Nordic Film and TV Fund and Eurimage. Most national funds want money back, although there are some favorable terms. TV equity, meaning money that the television station put in to co-produce, in quotes, the film, and private investors. But you don't have to recoup a lot of others. Tax incentives, regional funds, TV license fees, grants, prizes, and awards. So the recoupable cost of production can be as little as 35% of the total, which means that anybody who is going to get a share of future revenue can get it quite quickly if the non-recoupable costs are high. Film breakdown. Total recoupable cost of the film minus all producers' net revenues equals 0. So not a lot of European films reach this point. The sad news is that in a study that the Swedish Film Institute did, it was 4 films out of 104. 4 films out of 104. Profits are shared in a distinct way. There's basically 100 points. 50 of them go to the production company and the talent, and 50 go to the financiers. And those points are usually not negotiable. The producer will negotiate his 50 points, but he won't give up any of the 50 points to finance sources. So they're really 2 distinct groups of money. That was a lot of mathematics. Can I help anybody with any of this? Yes. I'll tell you a sad story. I live in Rome, and I gave a copy of a PowerPoint presentation to my colleagues at one point. 1 year later, a German colleague was flown from Munich, used my entire PowerPoint, was paid $1,000, put in a hotel, flown to Rome, and couldn't deliver the speech because he couldn't remember it as well as I had when I did it. And it had my copyright on every page. So I will give you any slides that you want, but I won't give you all of the slides. And I'm sorry. So if you can tell me which slides were most important to you, I'm happy to do it. Yep. This I actually downloaded from a website in Paris. It's called the CSA, Conseil Supérieur Audiovisuel. I'll send you this, but it changes from year to year. You might want to find the site and update it because they renegotiate every year. This is this year's. I just flew in from Toronto. I was so jet lagged. But I live in Rome. Yeah. Um, it first of all, it depends on the film. You're talking to me. I used to be a distributor and of exactly this kind of film, so my rule was if I walked out of the cinema in wherever where I was previewing a film, if I knew the 5 cinemas it should open in North America, I'd buy it. If I didn't know the 5, if I only knew 3, or if I didn't know 1, there wasn't a hope. So I would say Berlin is very good, particularly for the more political films and the slightly more artsy offbeat films. Cannes, you have to be very careful about. Even if you win a Grand Prix, as 4 months, 3 weeks, 2 days did, it doesn't always pay off. If you want to sell North America, go to Toronto. If you want to sell Southern Europe and the Middle East, go to Venice. If you want to sell genre, go to the AFM. But beyond that, Locarno sometimes helps. A friend of mine won Best Documentary with Tahrir Square 3 years ago, and without that he never would have sold the film, and it went everywhere because it won. So it's really, it's a very delicate mix, and one of the things about great sellers is they actually have the same kind of instincts I had as a distributor. Which festival, which part of the festival, which day in the festival, and they usually can make it work. TIFF is great for North America. It's getting a run for its money from South by Southwest, my new favorite. But yes.
Could you go back to the last slide where I read this and never experienced it.
This one?
Explain that to investors.
Well, first of all, there was a study done in the UK by an MBA student who was a friend of mine, and he interviewed every private investor who'd invested in British or Irish films for over a 5-year period, and there was only one single reason they invested: glamour. That was it. So you're not going to sell them on a return on investment. You're going to sell them on lunch with the cast and crew, on set, preview for them and their friends in their home a week before the release. Anything you can do like that. I spoke to 2 of the Swedish investors who are paying for movies in Stockholm at Cannes this year, and they both had exactly the same. They were putting between 50 and 100,000 in, and they were being looked after in Cannes, not 100% of the time. They understood they were there with a working writer, director, producer combination, but they were there, and they couldn't wait to see the film when it was finished.
I get that. You're saying that when you actually reach profit,
Yeah.
you have those financiers that say we're happy to share 10%.
Yes. Remember, it's the recoupable cost of production, right? Okay. So the recoupable cost of production, if it's the Danish Film Institute and it's 2 private investors and it's TV equity and it's maybe you put some of your own money in and you're considered an investor, the Danish Film Institute will step back and not take profits. And they want the production company to take those profits. TV wants its money back. The private investors want their money back. You get your money back, the little bit you invested. And you can manipulate those 50 points by taking the Danish Film Institute points and your own points and putting them on your side of the split. And then places like Finland never take any profit points, so they're not part of the recoupable cost of production. No, they want their money times 125% minimum. Yeah. Yes, it does work in Europe. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Excuse me? Yeah. The Germans totally accept it. The Italians accept it. The Eastern Europeans accept it. So, you know what? Let's lobby the Norwegians. um, are there any other questions I can answer? Okay, I only have a few more slides. So, the first one, just so you know, Stephen King has had 34 novels adopted to film. And almost all of the films on this page are absolutely major money winners. So I was told before I came here that Norwegian producers were reluctant to option books because they considered them to be secondary films rather than real art or something. So I just saw this slide and put it up and thought, maybe they have to think for a minute that something might work. Okay, you may want to get your cameras out, or I'll send you these. So what kind of a book makes a good film? These are the 10 questions, but in much more detail by the professor from NYU, who's a screenwriter, a screenwriting teacher, has done adaptations and writes novels. And it's a long piece. I think it's about 5 pages long, but it's the most intense discussion of how adaptation really does work. Did you get it? 2 more. Okay. This has several articles about screenplay adaptation by Michael Hauge. It's called Story Mastery, and he obviously makes his money as a consultant. But a lot of what he says is pretty serious and thought-provoking. And this is a wonderful list with, 50 or 75 articles that cover all aspects of adaptation. And I found really interesting articles in here from independent filmmakers, from writers, from story editors who worked on adaptation. Okay? And this is the second last one. And it's funny, and I loved reading it, just so you know, adapt or die. His attitude is a little more lighthearted, but I thought a number of things he said were important. And then there's a man named Stephen Follows in the UK. There are 2 of them. One is a singer and the other one is a film person. And this takes all of the things that I told you and breaks it down. So how is a cinema's box office revenue distributed, and how much of it ends up with the filmmakers? So if you need to see a rehash of this with some real examples, this will show you how this split works. He's got a wonderful website where he does extraordinary statistical investigations, whether low-budget films actually make money, how much do actors get paid, how many stuntmen are in the average film. I mean, his taste is very broad, and he has a very committed readership that keep asking him these crazy questions that kind of provoke him, and he sorts things out. But this article should help you with what I gave you. And then I thought I'd just end with the timeline for a film to remind you, when you're setting out with the idea of adapting a book into film, you're talking about 7 years. This is a long relationship. So this has got my email address on it, so if you write me and say I want the slides to do with, I'll send them to you. So is there anything I can, yeah? The publishers know that, and actually in Europe that's one of the standard questions. The last time I negotiated, a producer I was working with negotiated with a German agent. We knew it had been published in 21 countries. We knew the number of languages. We knew which countries it had an impact. It's not just how many books were sold, but the critical reviews are something that you need to think about. When you're doing an adaptation, checking the book reviews is often very helpful for the content, not just for the marketing and sales later. So I've actually found the opposite, that it's quite, it's quite... animation is its own world in Europe, but for example, a Norwegian company made a children's book into a film and a sequel, and I would say that Twigson was supported a lot because of the notoriety of the book, so that the marketing didn't have to be as expensive. But I'd love to see a comparison of it and of Christina Knudsen's Richard the Stork, which recently opened here, because it was the opposite. It wasn't a brand. It wasn't based on a book, and I think the marketing cost must have been much higher to simply get the same level of visibility. So that would be a very interesting study in marketing. A friend of mine in Hamburg has been working on a children's animated feature for a number of years, and she's slowly getting the money together to make it. It's based on an original idea. And out of frustration, she borrowed money from her mother, bought a children's brand by competing for it from a publisher, and immediately got a sales agent who more than covered the cost of the option. So there's no question those branded books with audiences are A, going to cost more, and B, in the long run may save a lot. But unfortunately for us in Europe, it's hard to raise development money. So that's the usual dilemma. Yes? Well, it depends on the producer, but I work with producers on scripts that I know I can finance. So it's kind of like when I was buying films as a distributor. If I know how the finance plan can be made to work, I'll dive in. But usually it's very early on in the financing stage, very late in the development stage, and I usually set up the co-production and worry about the private investors, for example, later. I'll look for the key components first. And I work with maybe 5 projects at a time. I can't do more than that. My head can't deal with more than that. And you always end up competing with yourself with too many projects. You don't want to go to NRW with 2 different projects because they'll only pick one. So. Anything else? We have 9 more minutes slotted for this, so you can leave early. Okay. So if you want any slides, send them to me, and I'll select the slides and send them back. Thank you.
Long traditions and is famous throughout Norway. However, Books at Haugesund is a newcomer of the year. And what a smart invention that is, because great stories from books are often made into marvelous movies. And therefore, Haugesund Film Festival should be a natural meeting point for people from the book business to meet people from the film industry. And the film festival has invited 5 of the best literary agents from the Nordic countries to pitch their top novels for you. Novels that they think will travel well into film. And the agents each have 10 to 15 minutes for their pitch. If anyone in the audience have pressing questions that can't wait, you may ask them immediately. But otherwise, we will have 30 or 40 minutes afterwards for a speed dating here. There will be some wine served, and we can go out to the balcony, whatever. And you can ask anyone, talk about these projects or other projects. And at 5 o'clock, we're all invited to a boat trip, so we'll just walk downstairs and go for a boat trip for an hour. And I've heard that this is the first summer day in Haugesund this year. So we're so lucky to be here today and to be invited on this boat trip. So that's lovely. It's not always like that here on the West Coast. My name is, by the way, Tuva Urbæk Sørheim. I work as editor-in-chief in Kagge Forlag in Oslo. I have some experiences as agent as well, because I used to be the leader of Cappelen Dam Agency in Oslo. And I am somehow connected to the film industry as well, as I'm chairman of the board of a Norwegian film distribution company called Arthouse. But for my years in the book industry, I know how important the literary agents are to the authors, because of course authors always want great reviews, great sales, but even more than that, they want to be translated into other languages, and maybe the best, that their books will be made into movies or TV series. That's a dream that many of them have, and then reach a wider audience than a book ever can. So the agent that we'll meet here today are the one who can make the dream come true. And we're starting up with Lena Stinakakko from Finland. Rights and Brands Licensing in Finland. That's a big Nordic agency. It's got offices in Stockholm and Helsinki and London. And they have worked on the Moomin brand, so they have a wider scope. It's not only literature and film, but also licensing and merchandising. Rights and Brands newly merged with the agency of Ottawa Publishing House, and therefore holds a lot of the rights from Ottawa as well. And Lena Stina will introduce to you The Evil Book by Kai Erik. The floor is yours.
Dear listeners, it's a great pleasure to be here this afternoon and to get a chance to talk to you about a book that I've seen as a movie since the very first time I was reading it. It was still a manuscript that I had downloaded on my iPhone. I was on the move, but just couldn't stop reading. No matter how quickly I was absorbing the text, and no matter how vigorously I was scrolling the screen, I just couldn't scroll fast enough to find out what happens next. Like Tuva told you, my name is Lena Stinakakko. I'm from the Nordic agency called Rights and Brands, working at our office in Helsinki. We are a licensing agency that brings Nordic rights and brands to a global arena. Our background is in literature, art, and design. We are a 360-degree agency, so we use all aspects of character representation and branding. And you will most likely recognize that character up there, the Moomin Troll. The Moomins are indeed beloved figures all over the world. Their creator, the artist, and the novelist Tuve Jansson is one of the best-known Nordic authors today, and our experiences and successes with the Moomin brand have given us an established international platform. And this platform has been recently strengthened and widened thanks to the merge with Ottawa Group Agency. So we now have a worldwide network of sub-agents and over 700 clients. But today I want to tell you about the thrilling novel The Evil Book by Kai Erik. All the audio-visual rights for this work are available, and there is clear franchising potential in this story too. Kai is a young Finnish writer who writes actually in Swedish. Swedish is his mother tongue. In Finland, I don't know if you know this, but about 6% of the population have Swedish as their first language. And to start with, I actually have a message from the author to you.
I want you to feel that my story is like a mystery box, in the sense that while unraveling it, I want you to be obsessed with the urge to find out what's inside of it.
And The Evil Book is indeed a mystery box, an entertaining story to unravel and full of surprises that make your imagination tingle. In short, you could say that in The Evil Book, The Name of the Rose meets Stephen King. It's a dark but seductively entertaining tale about a book that possesses evil powers. This is the story in short. Mikkel Backman is a university teacher. He's in his 50s, he has a wife and a grown-up son, and he's a bit frustrated with his ordinary life. He also has terrible back pains all the time. In the very first chapter of the book, Mikkel is giving a normal lecture to his students, but in the middle of this lecture, he gets the chill of his life. One of his students, young Pasi in his early 20s, Pasi is quite lost in his life. He has no previous serious interest in literature courses. But now this Pasi mentions a collection of poems from decades ago and wants to write his essay on these poems. Why does this make the teacher, Mikkel, absolutely horrified? This collection of poems that Pasi is talking about, and that Mikkel doesn't want to be talked about, was written back in the 1920s by a young poet. It was never published, and instead of a literary career, the author actually became famous for poisoning dozens of people at a high society wedding. His brother was getting married to the love of the poet's life. It also turns out that Mikkel's deepest, darkest secrets, his illicit romance with a young student, as well as the accident where his back pains originate from, are all tied to this infamous collection of poems. But no one should ever even know about the existence of these poems anymore, for as much as Mikkel thinks, the very last copy of the manuscript was destroyed in a tragic fire years ago. Despite his teacher's resistance, Pasi digs deeper and deeper into this evil manuscript, for it's just a book, and a book can't hurt anyone. Or can it? Pasi gets obsessed to the point where there's no return, and Mikkel tries to help him, although he knows it's all in vain. Pasi's mind is poisoned. Here are just a couple of incidents that happen. Pasi decides to take revenge on a publisher by sending him the poems he's read. This is an older man who's been abusing him and other young men. When the publisher reads the poems, he actually ends up killing himself with gas. Then it turns out that years ago, when Mikkel, the teacher, let her lover read the poems, she walked under a bus. She didn't die, but her mind was so severely damaged that she still lies in a mental hospital mute. And when Pasi, in his delirium, sends Mikkel's son one of these poems, the son walks under a train. But it's only then that the evil gets out more widely again and invades the young minds at the university campus. So this is a mystery, and it's a thriller. It's psychological horror and psychological suspense, for the evil in this story is rooted more in what the book and the poems do their readers than anything else. The act of reading and its effects, this is where the evil powers of the book lie. And although many people and even some of the main characters die in this story, there's actually quite a lot of people dying, the story has clear potential for sequels. For the evil manuscript is not destroyed, but lives on and on and on. On top of Stephen King and Umberto Eco's The Name of the Rose, the evil book has been compared to contemporary classics like Donna Tartt's The Secret History or Carlos Ruiz Zafón's The Shadow of the Wind. And another story, both book and film, that comes to mind is Jon Ajvide Lindqvist's Let the Right One In. The film was directed by Thomas Alfredson, and the American version of the film was called Let Me In, directed by Matt Reeves. The evil book has got raving reviews in newspapers and magazines. Here's one of my favorite quotes from our main newspaper in Finland. A sublime dish of traditional mystery, spiced with a relaxed, youthful sensibility. This journalist actually started his review by the classic line, "Stop the presses, we have a new front page." And yes, the book is indeed relaxed and youthful. The story happens in our contemporary and realistic world, so no epoch is needed and no special effects are necessary, although you do get a chance to have great fun with them if you wish. The dialogue is sharp and funny, and it rings true, and there are a lot of references to familiar everyday details. And besides being a mystery and a thriller, the story deals with the ever-interesting and important themes like how complicated it is to be young and make your choices for life. It deals with different aspects of friendship, about painful experiences of getting hurt and losing the people you love. And of course, it's about love and sex, the two essential ingredients in all good stories. The Evil Book was awarded the Bookseller's Prize, called Thank You for the Book Medal. This is the prize where the winner is voted by the very people who sell us the books in bookstores. The Evil Book is also an international success. It was the international hot book, not only once but twice, in the American magazine called Publishers Weekly, and it's been translated and is currently under translation to several languages. You've seen some of the international covers in my slides, and we actually even chose to present the Italian cover in the leaflet that you've been given out, as it conveys the atmosphere and the mystery of the Evil Book perhaps the best. I hope to get the chance to tell you more about the Evil Book afterwards and discuss your possible interest in the audiovisual rights to this story and also its franchising potential. So please come for a chat afterwards or get in touch with me via email. My email address is in the booklet as well. Thank you, and beware of books.
The book industry has an average of 80% women and 20% of men, and that often goes for the readers as well, and also for this seminar, because 1 out of 5 pitchers is a man, and he's the next one to pitch. Lars Ringhoff used to work in publishing before he started his own literary agency in 2001, and was the first agent to represent Danish authors in Denmark. 2 years ago, his company merged with the well-known literary agency Leonard and Høyer, and Copenhagen Literary Agency was founded. They represent 75 authors from Scandinavian countries like Hanne Vibeke Holst and Henning Mankell, Karsten Jensen and Erik Fosnes Hansen. Today, Lars will talk about Kirsten Hammann and her book, Look at Me. Please.
Thank you. So nice to be here. And everybody's sitting inside, even though it's very good weather outside. That's the new jacket, and maybe a little boring, but it's a series of 4 books. And if you look at them together, it's kind of more aesthetic. Here's the original as a paperback. And I've chosen to talk about this book because when asked what kind of books could you pitch here, you have to look at your list and see that there are actually a lot of options out there already. And this book has been optioned twice. So directors and writers have been circling it for a couple of years, and I've decided that we have to make a movie out of this book. Girl meets boy, boy meets girl, and they hate each other. Look at Me, the novel by Kirsten Hammann, is a slightly twisted version of the romantic comedy, waiting for the right producer, writer, or director to add his or her temperament and timing and tempo and create a love story for our time. Throughout her writing career, Kirsten has often returned to the same point in time to start her novels. It's the moments following a catastrophe. In Look at Me, it's the day after Julie's boyfriend, who had proposed to marry her, and whose children she longs to have, leaves her. To think about it, in India, for a couple of months. I'll be back, he says. And Julie believes him, or wants to believe him. Her friends and the readers of the novel are not so sure. Julie is left alone in her new apartment with the rent and an unwillingness to accept the shattering of her dreams, of that wonderful life she thought she had before her. She decides that she must rent out a couple of rooms until her fiancé returns. Sune, the main male character of the novel, is also experiencing a catastrophe. His is the phenomenal success of his best friend. Like Sune, he's also a writer, but while Sune has written 2 well-received but not very popular collections of short stories, his friend has written 2 novels and sold a shitload of books. Soon he will be translated and published into other countries, including Norwegian. So when his friend asks Sune to babysit his small daughter while he and his wife are having dinner with an older, very important figure in the world of literature, it's a catastrophe for Sune. He decides that it's now or never, that he must write his truly great novel. He quits his job, he sells his apartment, and he starts looking for a couple of rooms to rent. When Julie accepts Sune as her roommate, she does not see someone in him who can fulfill her dreams. And when Sune sees Julie, he does not see anything remotely close to the women in his hastily assembled masturbatory fantasies. They take an instant dislike to each other. Julie orders erotic toys and vibrators on the internet because she's read in a woman's magazine that orgasms will keep her attractive. Sune masturbates relentlessly because it's the one thing he knows how to do and how to finish. As an aspiring author, he suffers from the worst of problems. He does not know what to write about. Desperate as he is, he also turns to the internet and orders a spy camera and a microphone, which he installs in Julie's part of the apartment. He believes that spying on Julie and her friends will give him material with which to add some truth in his novel. And truth is what we're talking about here. Every once in a while, a producer, a director, or a scriptwriter, or any combination of those finds the perfect true tone and voice for a romantic comedy. What makes it perfect and popular, besides the talents of the producer, director, or writer, is the way it deals with love in a contemporary context, and also stays, more or less, true to the formula of trials and tribulations, misunderstandings, and bad luck that the main characters must go through before they are either united or at least have reached another point in their lives than the ones they had when the story began. A producer, a director, or writer in search of true tone and voice for a romantic comedy can find much of it in this literary novel. And by true tone and voice, I do not mean a plug-and-play perfect in terms of a full-blown recipe for a screenplay, even though there are lots of scenes and dialogues in this book that can be plucked right out of the novel. By true tone and voice, I mean that the characters in the story are truly, perfectly toned and voiced. Their backstories, their present, what they say, what they do, and how they cannily resemble people we know, perhaps even ourselves. Even when they cross ours or their own boundaries, and even when what happens is perhaps not totally realistic, they are created to seem true to us by a talented author. The literary author's greatest task and most impressive talent is to create coherence, so that the person we meet on page 1 is undeniably the same person we bid farewell on the last page, even though the person has been changed by events. Changed but same is when we truly believe a story. This is the case with Look at Me. It's a novel about the many lies we live in a time where appearance is everything. But in order to expose inner lies, the writing, and most importantly, the characters, the exterior, must be true. Suna and Julie both have unrealistic dreams about their future and about who they are. Their dreams and aspirations fuel their actions, but there comes a time when dreams turns into deception of the self, and this is the exact moment the author of Look at Me investigates. What happens when the image we create of ourselves for others to see begin to crack? What do we do? And just before I went on, I remembered there's a scene in the book where Suna, the writer, decides that in order to write the great novel, he needs the right desk. And the right desk for him is a glass table that he's seen in an IKEA catalog. So he goes to IKEA, and while he goes there, he thinks about all the interviews he's going to make, where he will mention this table. And when he gets to IKEA, it's sold out. So he's hurled into a depression. Look at Me, or Look at Me, or Look at Me, investigates that moment in time when our innocent dreams turns to self-deception and what we then do. It can be adapted with a focus on suspense, the theme of surveillance, with the hidden camera and the microphones are spooky and scary, or sex. There's a lot of fucking in this book, and I mean a lot. It has elements of the absurd. There's an imaginary choir that judges and encourages Julie, like so many friends on Facebook. And it also has a layer of, a meta kind of layer of, as a novel about writing. And some of you may know that a lot of great literature is about writing and creating truth. It's a story of two people with great dreams of success, with images of themselves and of others that are created by their fantasies, who meet, hate each other, and then try to use each other. Sune, the author, steals the personal story from Julie, and Julie wants so much to get pregnant. And then, finally, they fuck. And they fuck a lot. And the sex is excellent. And they must decide to embrace compromise, to revise their self-image, to acknowledge that the catastrophe has already occurred, or to keep deceiving themselves and dreaming about a future that is almost behind them. It's a story of the times we live in, and it is waiting for the right producer, director, or writer to add his or her interpretation and make anew When Harry Met Sally. Thank you.
From Iceland comes Valgerður Benediktsdottir. She's the director of the Forlagets Rights Agency, which is part of Iceland's largest publishing house. Although Iceland is the smallest Nordic country, the literary production is highly impressive. Valgerður will introduce us to Sean, who in 2005 won the prestigious Nordic Council's Literature Prize and whose work has been translated into more than 30 languages. The book is called Moonstone, The Boy Who Never Was. The floor is yours.
Good afternoon, everyone. Moonstone, the boy who never was. That's a glittering fable of sex and cinema in 120 pages by the Icelandic author Sjón, one of the unavoidable names of contemporary European literature, according to El País. Sjón's novels have been translated into 40 languages. His long-time collaboration with the Icelandic singer Björk led to an Oscar nomination for his lyrics for the Lars von Trier movie Dancer in the Dark. The book rights of Moonstone have been sold all over the world, to more than 30 countries. Theatrical rights have been sold to the National Theatre of Iceland, and the play will be premiered next year. The book was selected as one of the best contemporary Scandinavian literature 2017 by Booker International Shortlistee Dóttir Norse. It was nominated for the Best Translated Book Award 2017 in US. It is the 29th Annual Lambda Literary Award finalist 2017. It was nominated for the PEN America Literary Awards 2016, listed as one of the best novels of the year in US 2016 by Financial Times. It received the Icelandic Literary Prize 2013, the DV Cultural Prize for Literature 2013, the Icelandic Booksellers Prize 2013, and last but not least, the Red Feather for the most curious sex scene in Icelandic literature 2013. Opening with a graphic scene of oral sex and closing with penetrating philosophical questions, Moonstone, the boy who never was, is narrated in a close third person with unforgettable images, an intense style, and a unique hero. The story asks the big questions while remaining playful. Its hero, Mánistinn, is a 16-year-old orphan with a dark red hair raised by his great-grandmother's sister. He is dyslexic and queer and lives in tiny but cosmopolitan Reykjavik in 1918. He is on the fringes of a society that is itself at the fringes of the world. The scenery of the age in the book is vast and dramatic, a unique setting for a novel. Katla, one of Iceland's largest volcanoes, spits out fire and brimstone. The Spanish influenza epidemic has already torn through Europe, Asia, and North America, and is now emptying the streets of Reykjavik, quickly killing hundreds of townspeople and forcing thousands to their sick beds. At the same time, the Icelandic nation prepares to become independent state. It is along these dead streets that Máni Moonstone performs sexual favors for local men in secret, for the price of a ticket to the cinema, his place of refuge and joy, where he can experience another reality, one he desperately needs. He lives for the movies. Asleep, he dreams the pictures in variations where the tapestry of events is threaded with strands from his own life. Awake, he lives on outskirts of society. Máni is particularly taken with Louis Foyat's 10-part, 7-hour-long French crime movie, The Vampires. It tells the story of a gang who hold French society in the grip of fear. Under the leadership of the Grand Vampire, people are murdered, name and social rank are no guarantee. Foremost among the vampires is the girl Irma Vep, Queen of the Night. Wearing a black costume, she scales building like a shadow. Her figure becomes combined with Sola G, a motorbike-riding girl from a different social class in Reykjavik, who seems to be the one person who knows Máni secrets. Máni has feelings for Sola. He idolizes her. She's a diva. And it is Sola who appears on her red motorbike in the opening scene of the book and stops on the top of the hill, and Máni on his knees beneath with a gentleman in his mouth. Sola is like a goddess, dressed in a black leather overall. Her lips are red as blood, her eyes ringed with kohl that makes her powdered skin appear whiter than white. A girl like no other. The sun against the moon. Máni obsession with cinema is affected by the flu, as the cinemas are closed once it becomes an epidemic. His male clients disappear when touching strangers become dangerous due to contagion. Epidemics reach every level of society. No one is out of their reach. They slaughter the poor as well as the rich. Máni falls ill, but survives from the flu and soon becomes an assistant, aiding the doctor who saved him, attending to the sick and dying, driven in a motor car by Sola G. The boy, however, secretly carries his own disease, homosexuality. Máni finds himself relatively at ease among the dying. Something about it seems familiar to him, though we don't discover why until the novel's end, when we find out that he, born to a leprous mother, had stayed in the leper hospital before sent to the capital. He learned from an early age that his mother's illness was unmentionable. Leprosy in those days meant isolation, because people were afraid to have any contact with lepers. On the day of the country's independence, Máni seeks closer ties with Denmark, meaning he has sex with a Danish sailor. The scene is played like a silent movie, high drama, the demands of Eros, a sudden discovery followed by public shock. He faces exile that ironically is the catalyst for his escape out of the city and away from his lonely life. The city elders, even those who have slept with him, among them the man he sucked off in the opening scene of the book, attempt to airbrush him out of history, on the grounds that the last thing people need at the dawn of the Icelandic sovereign state are headlines about a sodomy scandal. The boy is sent off to London. The narrative then pauses and time passes. Next, we see Máni as an adult under another name, M. Peter Carlson, who has by then been living in England for 10 years and now has returned to Reykjavik as an interpreter for the Pool Group, an actual poetry and film collective. He visits his great-aunt's tomb, the tombs of those who died of the Spanish flu. He passes by Sola G's house, wishing her to live on untouched in his memory. Just before he arrives at the leper hospital, he experiences a sudden sensation of weightlessness. Glancing at his hands, he discovers that he can see right through them. He gropes for his body and finds that he is clutching at thin air. He can't feel a thing apart from the winged beats where his heart used to be. He arrives at the leper hospital and meets the eye of a patient, Sigurður, grandfather of Bosi, but Bosi is a gay man who will die of AIDS in 1993. Sigurður is as well the great-grandfather of Sigurjón, who will become known as Sjón and write the story of Moonstone, the boy who never was, in Uncle Bosi's memory. In the very moment when Sigurður thinks a young man is standing before him, the past is brought face to face with the future. M. Peter Carlsson's journey along the old streets of New Reykjavik while retrieving Máni Steinn's life as a boy at the same erases Máni Steinn's life story step by step by going backwards along the boy's storyline. Somehow, in a way, we saw in Brad Pitt's movie, The Curious Case of Benjamin Button. At last, at the door of the leper hospital, where Máni Steinn's story starts, the circle is completed. The boy who never was finally comes to a vis-a-vis with the boy who was. This final clash of impossibilities gives birth to a big butterfly, black as volcano Katla's smoke, yet bewitchingly beautiful as Irma Webb in The Vampires. In a flutter of wings, Máni Steinn vanishes, as if he were just one of those dreams that you cannot retain in the morning, no matter how hard you try. When the unexpected reason for the story is revealed at the end of the book, it all but leaves a gasp in the throat. The parallels between the symptoms of the Spanish flu and AIDS become clear. The book resonates deeply as an allegory about gay history across the world. While the society demanded that everyone should help out during the medical emergency in 1918, it had no sympathy for the victims of AIDS all those years later. Tainted love and tainted blood are also the constants in both vampire stories and tales of the AIDS epidemics. The fear and the horror of infected blood in a spectrum with vampires on the one side and those afflicted with the HIV virus on the other somehow resonates invisibly all through the novel. Moonstone is a small book, but with a large heart. The author has stated the mission of the book quite clearly. He said, "Life is an ongoing state of emergency. We simply move within the parameters DEFCON 1 to DEFCON 5. We should all be there for each other all of the time and respect the individual." This book turned out to be the formula for a bestseller in Iceland. It received love from all around. But the response that mattered the most for the author came from the gay community, which saw the book as important that one of their own had become a part of the gallery of characters in Icelandic fiction. Finally, I want to quote David Mitchell, the much awarded and brilliant author of Cloud Atlas. He said, "Moonstone, the boy who never was, is Schoen's simmering masterpiece, vibrant and visceral, briskly paced but meditative, unsettling yet droll, and flecked with beauty. It is a pitch-perfect study of transgression, survival, and love. Thank you.
The next one on stage is from Norway, Kristin Emble. She works for Norse Code Agency. That's a brand new agency started up in 2016. It differs somehow from the other agencies represented here today because they focus solely on film rights from literary authors and also from screenwriters. Norse Code Agency represents the film rights for the publishers in Norway, Aschehoug and Oktober. And Kristin will pitch the book Blue from Maja Lunde. Maja Lunde's former novel has been #1 on Der Spiegel's best-selling list for several weeks now, so we are all very proud of her, even though she's an Aschehoug author. But she publishes her books with her children's books with Kagge, so yeah. Well, anyway, Kristin, where are you? There.
Yeah, my name is Kristin. I work Norse Code Agency, which was formed in less than a year ago with Morten Tyldum, director, and his long-time producer colleague Guri Neby. And like Tuva said, yeah, we have a collaboration with Aschehoug and Oktober, and film rights worldwide only. And today I've chosen to tell you about this book, Blue. This written by Maja Lunde, and I just some key facts. It's not out yet. It's being released October 12th, and Aschehoug is the publisher. It's a dystopian drama, and the target audience, the publisher said, is like 16 to 45, or we'll just say 16 plus. It has international potential. Everyone believes it's been pre-sold to territories that have already bought the History of Beath, which is an international bestseller. Maja Lunde, Norwegian author and screenwriter. She has written several books for children and young adults. Her latest, Battle, is currently in production. And she has written scripts for Norwegian film and TV, and that's been all great audience successes. The History of Beath in 2015 was her first adult novel, and it received massive attention when it was first presented at the London Book Fair. And the novel has won her several prizes, and so far it's sold to 30 territories. And at the moment, top in Germany for several weeks, yes, I think 280,000 copies. And it will be released in the UK and the US today, actually. With Simon & Schuster. So back to Blue. Thematically, again, she deals with the themes of man and nature. She paints the portrait of humans on the backdrop of a world gone askew. Like her previous book, the world is gone to pieces. Political systems have collapsed, communication is down, nature is disappearing, drying up, and people are fleeing their homes. In short, the world as we know it is gone. The story opens in war-ridden France, where we soon learn that the global warming and the lack of water supply is the reason for this post-apocalyptic scenery. We meet the young father David and his little girl Lou. They arrive at a refugee camp where they hope to find David's wife Anna and their little baby boy, whom they have been separated from. The land is destroyed, temperature is high, the sun shines from an ever-clear blue sky, and it hasn't rained for years. Everyday life is a struggle. The camp is full of people, but it's only a temporary stay until they will all try and make their way further north, where there is said to be better conditions. People are coming and people are leaving, but David and Lou are staying. The story slowly reveals that David is to blame for the separation of his family. He was supposed to look after them, and he didn't. The plan was always to meet at this refugee camp, and then David's dilemma becomes clear. Will he stay and hope to reunite the family, or will he flee and try and save himself and his daughter? As we follow David's desperate search and his guilt, a parallel story is told in Norway in 2017. This is a story of love and revenge. Signe lost the love of her life and is now plotting her long-awaited revenge over the man who broke her heart. Partly structured as a road trip or a boat trip, Signe embarks up on a hazardous crossing of the North Sea. The story paints a picture of how we in 2017 make choices in our personal life as well as politically that will potentially lead to the downfall of human existence. And Linda asked the questions again, could we have made other choices? The two stories seems to interconnect, each giving the other higher meaning. Suspense is built, and although the solution is never clear, Lunde invites the reader on a journey that is full of suspense and drama. As hope seems to be in an escalating decline for David, the story of Signe's revenge suddenly seems to be the one that can save him and his daughter. The present and the future story connect when David and Lou find Signe's sailboat in the dried out French garden outside the refugee camp. And I'll leave it at that. If you want to read, you'll have to contact me. Blue weaves a spellbinding story of past and future against the backdrop of an urgent global crisis. It's haunting, it's thought-provoking, and it says just as much about the powerful relationships between parent and children, lovers, as it does about our relationship to nature and humanity. And it deals with the most fundamental of human emotions, hope. So, why should this be a film? Maja Lunde is a very visual writer. She is a scriptwriter, and it's very obvious in her novels as well. She describes spectacular scenic settings, and I think that any filmmaker would love to expand on and dive into. She writes visionary narrative, strong plot, and very driven characters. There's movement in drama in both stories, and they're all set up in like a 3-act structure, which is, I know, very similar to the film structure. And although Lunde creates like a big universe and big dreams and big world paintings, her dramas are very contained, and they can be played out anywhere in any time space. And I do think that there's a potential that the film could travel across borders, and a very kind of bendable, flexible budget. I think you could do I Am Legend, which no one could afford to do, or you could do The Road. So that's Blue. I hope you want to talk to me more about it. And in conclusion, I would just encourage everyone to stay more in contact with publishing houses and agents. We represent authors and we have their best at heart. However, we can be of service to you as well. We can give you tips and facilitate process and do research, and the best, all of this we can do for free at some point. So, thank you.
The last one to pitch today is Josefine Holmström from Salomonsen Agency in Stockholm. Salomonsen handles the rights for many great Scandinavian authorships, not the least our Norwegian Jon Esbø. And in Norway, we're so excited about The Snowman, which was filmed in Oslo with Michael Fassbender as Harry Hole, and which will be launched in October. But today, Josefine will talk about Johan Theorin, who also has got a wide audience in Norway. And the book is called The Asylum. Please welcome Josefine Holmström.
On the west coast of Sweden lies the small community of Valla. 29-year-old Jan Hauger is one of its newest residents, recently arrived to work at the Dell nursery. But the Dell is no ordinary preschool. Beneath its floors runs an underground tunnel leading straight to St. Patricia's Psychiatrical Hospital, or St. Psychos, as the hospital is more often called, a high-security facility for the country's most violent and dangerous psychopaths. and the kids Jan will be caring for are the children of its inmates. Part of Jan's new duties will be to escort the children through the tunnel connecting the hospital and the nursery to their parents at the other side. What his new employer doesn't know is that Jan has his own reasons for wanting to work at the nursery, reasons that date back to a trip into the woods made years ago with another group of children, a trip that ended in the disappearance of a young boy. In the asylum, Johan Theorin departs from the familiar landscape of Öland to deliver a standalone psychological thriller and a story of warped love and spine-chilling suspense. When Jan Hauger first arrives at the nursery, he gives the impression of a compassionate guy with a love for working with children, but yet he's strangely drawn to the psychiatric hospital. During his time at the nursery, he works hard at finding a way for him to enter the hospital. The underground passage connecting the nursery with the hospital is heavily surveyed, and it will not be possible for Jan to enter that way. At night, when the children are asleep, he explores the underground tunnel, and in the end he manages to find a way in, through a claustrophobic fire exit hidden to the untrained eye. Once inside the hospital, Jan will have to be really careful, both of the inmates but also not to get caught by any guards. It turns out the reason for Jan's desire to enter the psychiatric ward goes by the name of Alice Rami, a love from his childhood, who is said to be staying at the hospital. During their 17 years apart, they have not met or even spoken to each other. Yet Alice still exists, as vivid as ever in Jan's mind, and he is now desperate to meet her. In the quest to find and talk to Alice Rami, and then ultimately trying to free her from the hospital, Jan gets mixed up in some questionable business controlled by some of his co-workers at the nursery. Their goal is to talk to the notorious killer, Ivan Rössel, who is held up at the hospital, and find out if and why he killed so many people all those years ago, murders of which he was never convicted for. Jan helps them by secretly delivering letters to the hospital, with the intent that it also helps him communicate with Alice Rami. As the story unravels, we realize the truth about Jan Hauger. When he was 20 years old, he kidnapped a young boy and held him hostage for 26 hours. But why did he do it? What would drive such a caring person to kidnap a child? Meanwhile, Ivan Rössel managed to escape the hospital with the help of one of Jan's colleagues, Hanna. She has developed a love for Ivan and is willing to help him escape as an innocent man. Jan is held hostage and is brought to the crime scene of one of Ivan's old victims. In doing so, they have also kidnapped one of the children at the nursery, Leo. When trying to stop Ivan from hurting Leo, Jan pushes Ivan, together with himself, off a cliff. Jan survives, but what will happen to him now that everyone believes he is the murderer? The ending of the book is open, creating possibilities that, if adapted to the screen, can lead to several films, or perhaps a second season of a television series. Now, what I find most interesting about this book is its complex characters. They help bring a depth to the story, which would also be very interesting to see adapted to the screen. The asylum follows our protagonist, Jan Hauger, who comes to the city of Valla to work at the nursery. He deeply cares for the children because they understand him and they understand him. He finds adults much more difficult to handle and has spent most of his life alone and on his own. He's insecure but driven by a desire to meet his teenage love, Alice Rami, once again. The reader will sympathize with Jan, but while doing so also receive glimpses of Jan's troubled past. This makes us constantly doubt whether Jan is good or evil, and is also the reason for his complexity. We see Jan's love and care for the children, and believe he is good, yet his love for Alice drives him to commit evil acts. In the book, we only ever get to meet Alice Rami once, by the end of the story, when it's too late to find out who she really is. Before then, she gets to remain a fantasy as well as a memory. As we know her, she exists only in the mind of Jan Hauger, a troubled girl who was once nice to Jan in a difficult time for him. The two of them manage to connect in their shared misery. Because of this, she is Jan Hauger's biggest love and desire. The love is so strong he would do anything for her, despite the fact that they haven't spoken since they were teenagers, and even then their meeting was only brief. The character of Alice is complex simply because we do not know if she is real or imagination, something which could be greatly played with when adapted to the screen. What happened to Alice after parting ways with Jan so many years ago? For all of his life, Jan believed she had in some way or other helped with the killings of his childhood tormentors, the Gang of Four, but we can never be sure. Did she go on to live a more peaceful life, or is she still as screwed up as Jan? This is something which could be explored in a sequel of a possible filmatization. Then there's the character of Hanna. Hanna is desperately in love with the notorious killer Ivan Rössel, and believes him to be innocent, despite the fact that she sees proof of him having committed the crimes he's accused of. She is captivated by Ivan's charm and therefore willing to pin Jan down as the killer, despite having developed a friendship with Jan over the months since he arrived at the nursery. Hanna is secretive, mysterious, and never reveals her true desires until she is cornered with them. She is, just like Jan, drawn to the job at the nursery because of motives other than working with the children. In fact, she actually seems to dislike the children and is only there to get close to Ivan. She claims to be speaking with him in order to help her friend and coworker Lillian find out the truth about whether or not Ivan is responsible for the murder of her younger brother who disappeared one night after prom and was later never found. So Hanna and Jan actually both quite resemble each other. They both have ulterior reasons to be working at the nursery, some of which include their warped love for a patient staying at the hospital. They keep to themselves and hide their secrets, never revealing their true intent. Jan sees himself in Hanna and shares his secret about the child he hid in the woods so many years ago, and that is also why Hanna ends up being Jan's downfall. She is the one that creates the master plan that makes Jan a suspect of the murders committed by Ivan. So what makes all of these characters so interesting is that they travel on the border of being sane versus insane. They all share a fascination with the psychiatric ward and mental illness, and you're left wondering, is it because this is something we share as human beings, or are the characters themselves in fact insane? They showcase a complexity which is, as I've said, precisely what makes the book so interesting. The reader is constantly doubting what is real and what is not, and in the end we still cannot be sure if our protagonist is good or evil. Instead, we are left wondering throughout the story. There are several examples of complex characters in film that feature a mentally ill main character or perhaps a psychopath as the main role. But what makes Jan Hauger different is that we, as a reader, greatly sympathize with him, and throughout the story we suspect Jan has committed horrible acts, but we constantly look for a reason to believe he did them out of goodwill. This keeps the reader on his toes and is, I feel, one of the unique features of the story. Although the book was released in 2011, it still touches upon subjects that are relevant today. How do we define mental illness? What brings a person to commit horrible acts to the people around him? In The Asylum, Johan Theorin manages to create complex characters in a thrilling universe where you're unsure who's sane and who's not, and you question who is real and who is fantasy. This can be connected to the events happening in our society today, most recently just last week, where we find ourselves wondering, what is it that makes individuals hurt innocent people around them? And why are others drawn to this despite seeing the destruction it brings upon others? The Asylum is set in a small town on the west coast of Sweden, and mostly plays out in the psychiatric hospital or at the nursery connected to the hospital. The settings are dark, foreboding, and creepy. They creep up on you and seem to mostly be visited by night. For a filmatization, the settings would be a big factor in bringing the right amount of unpleasantness to the story. We follow Jan through claustrophobic passages, psychiatric hallways, and sketchy pubs, contrasted with the happy environment a nursery can bring. Even the fact that a happy and quite seemingly normal nursery is connected to a psychiatric hospital is enough to make a potential viewer uncomfortable. A little bit about the author. Johan Theorin began his literary career as a journalist and short story writer, but has since gone on to receive international recognition as a writer of suspense novels. He is now considered to be one of the most talented authors of crime and mystery fiction in Scandinavia. The author of 5 novels so far, Johan Theorin has attained international fame for his acclaimed Öland Quartet, a series of 4 novels set on the Baltic island of Öland and taking place during the 4 different seasons. The Öland Quartet has won Theorin not only the admiration of his readers and critics, but also a multitude of prestigious awards. So in the end, why should this be made into a film? First of all, the book portrays a complex protagonist who will keep a possible viewer at his or her toes. This combined with the environment in which he moves helps create great suspense and entertainment. Yet the book brushes upon heavy topics that can be related to our current time. A possible film could play with subjects such as mental illness, the obsessive love story, or simply ask the question of why some human beings have the desire to hurt others in the way that they do. Also, even though this is a standalone, the book actually has the possibility of turning into several works, since it leaves us with some unanswered questions and an open ending. This will leave an audience wanting more. So to finish this off, a little bit about me and Salomonsson Agency. My name is Josephine, and I work as the film and TV literary agent at the agency. This mostly involves being an agent to, in my opinion, some of Scandinavia's most talented screenwriters, but I also assist in book-to-film and television projects. Salomonsson Agency was founded in 2000. Today the agency has 18 employees and represents around 40 Nordic authors of literary fiction, crime fiction, children's fiction and narrative non-fiction worldwide, as well as a select list of screenwriters. Our clients belong to the most critically acclaimed and commercially successful writers from this corner of the globe. And if you're interested in hearing more about The Asylum or any of the work from our other authors, please come up to me after the presentations and we can talk more then. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you very much to all the 5 agents. Great presentations. I hope they will all turn into films or TV series. At least we would like to read them after hearing you. Now we will, they promised me they will serve some wine. I can only see glasses and no wine there, but I'm sure it will come. And you can come up and talk to the agents, or we can mingle and talk a little. And at 5 o'clock there will be a boat ride where we can mingle and talk a little bit more. So thank you all.